Hello and welcome at Book Lovers Companion. My name is Edith and right next to me is my lovely co-host, the Chattering Teacup.
Hello.
And here with us from Iceland, author and playwright Jónína Leósdóttir. Hello and welcome at Book Lovers Companion.
Hello, both of you.
Hello, hello. And thank you for making time for us. You must be awfully busy.
A little bit. Unusually busy because I've got 2 books out in 2 countries, yes.
Oh, yes, indeed. The book number 1 in your Adam and Sophia series, Deceit, came out this year in the English translation.
Absolutely, yes.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
And we had the pleasure of meeting you at the book launch at the Icelandic embassy in the UK, in London. And it was lovely to see you or meet you in person.
You too. We just didn't get enough time to talk, so we'll make up for it now.
Yes, absolutely, indeed. And you have written quite a few different kinds of books. Before we dive into Deceit, you're a very versatile author, if I may say so.
Or maybe it just took me a long time to find my genre.
All right, yeah.
No, not really. It's just that I'm interested in different kinds of things and different kinds of topics that suit different kinds of genres. So yes, I have written all sorts of books, yes, 20.
And for different age groups as well.
Yes, absolutely.
Is one age group more difficult to write for than another?
It's very difficult. I think it's very difficult to write for young adults. Yet I have written 5 such books. But I think an author just, physiologically, you grow out of being able to, because young people, they have a certain kind of language, and very often it's slang language, something which is very contemporary now and very old-fashioned tomorrow. So that makes it very difficult to write for young people, because you want the book to age well. You don't want it to just be okay and up to date now, but also in 1 year, 2 years, whatever. So it is like a balancing act, really, to be able to have it in classical language. And I don't mean old-fashioned, like for older people, but young enough, but not too young, and contemporary, but not too contemporary. So also there's this technological issue that, the young kids, they have so many ways of expressing themselves and being in contact. And you sort of don't follow that when you're like, I'm getting older. And, I just grow out of knowing how they contact each other and what is, how their lives are led. Because it seems to me that young people are so often in contact without being in the same room. They use all kinds of technology to be in connection. So I think I've now reached the age where I cannot write for young people anymore, just because of technological reasons, mostly.
Yeah, you do have a point. Yeah. And you also wrote humorous novels, or with a touch of humor?
Yes, I think actually you can say that about more or less everything I have ever written. All the books, and I also used to be a journalist, and sort of humor gets into everything. I think it's just because I am fairly positive kind of person, and also I grew up in a household where there was a lot of humor and laughing and, just a jolly outlook on life. So it's part of my genes, I think.
And the humor also comes through a bit in Deceit, in the way that people are described and how and they say and what they say.
Yes, I absolutely think so. And I did a crime series before, and it was even more prevalent in that crime series, the humorous aspect.
It's called the Edda Crime series, and it's only been published so far in Iceland.
Yes, unfortunately. Maybe that's going to change. I keep my fingers crossed unless I'm typing.
Yes, so do we. Because you said at the book launch, it's a bit like, your character in these books is a bit like the Icelandic Miss Marple.
Yes, I think so, because she is an old age pensioner. She's not terribly old. She's 67 and has just been made redundant from a bookstore where she has been the manager. And she has been working all her life. She's very energetic. She goes from A to B on a bicycle, and she's just having such fun. And then the bookshop gets sold, and she doesn't have a job. So she starts using her energy. She's not knitting like Miss Marple, Agatha Christie's, but she goes and tries to be helpful to tourists, because we have a lot of tourism in Iceland. And she lives in the west part of town, where I am living also, because they say you should write about what you know. So I placed her here, and she goes to the haunts of the tourists. She goes to museums and cafes, and if she sees somebody with a map trying to figure out where to go, she offers assistance and even drives people from A to B. And her family is really worried, because she is going into her car with strangers, even inviting them for pancakes at home. So she's just finding something to do, and she gets involved in mysteries, shall we say.
Now that you've described this
I have
character,
to read it.
yes. So everyone who's listening out there, please translate them into English. I want to read them.
Or German.
Yep.
Yeah, of course, or German, yeah. We read both, so just translate them. They sound great. Now, coming to your new one, which has been translated into English by Quentin Bates. Deceit, the first one in a new series.
Yes.
Yes. What can you tell us about the main characters? I mean, Adam, the psychologist, and Sophia, I hope I pronounce it at least slightly correctly, the policewoman, his ex-wife. How did you find them, or maybe they found you? Tell us a little bit about them.
I am such an Anglophile. I used to live in the UK, so I have long wanted to have an English person as a main character, as a protagonist in a book. And finally, I found the perfect place for an Englishman. The typical, he's maybe a little bit of a stereotype, because he's courteous and all this, sorry, excuse me, and all that. But I set the characters up against each other, really, because they used to be married. And obviously, when you divorce, there are some problems, and you feel you're better off not together. But they are forced, due to all sorts of circumstances, to work together and solve crime together. He obviously isn't a cop; he is a psychologist, but he obviously has insight. He's not he's not used to. He didn't learn to have. He's not forensic. Not a forensic psychologist, but needs must. And there's COVID, and his wife Sophia. She needs somebody to help her, and she hasn't got much choice. And I love putting them together in the situation where they have to cooperate.
And you said the book right at the beginning of the pandemic, which is interesting, because when we talk to other authors, or when you hear them talk about the books coming out recently, they usually shy away from the whole pandemic.
But I think it's also a source for humor, as Adam is, let's say, a bit obsessed with some regulations. So it lightens the mood.
He is very much afraid of getting COVID, because this obviously is before there's any inoculations. There's no shots you can get, and you just have to take care of yourself. All the hand washing and the sanitization and maybe masks a little bit later. They were not really used at the beginning. So yes, definitely that makes the atmosphere. But it scared me a little bit when I had finished the manuscript. And I don't usually talk too much about my books until I know that there's actually going to be a book. And people start asking you, what's it about? And I got a lot of reactions which were not really encouraging, because people said, oh, that's one thing I'm never going to read. I'm never going to read a book about the pandemic. So it was a little bit scary. But I think when people realize how I used the pandemic, it's not too bad.
No, it's
No,
not. I mean,
it's just a framework.
yeah, exactly. And like she said, I mean, it makes up for a little bit of humor you put into it. Because when you look at the opposite to his ex-wife, and she's, oh yeah, come on, oh,
Yes.
you've been in a car with me, now I can't even
Yeah.
sit next to you on the sofa. What's wrong with you?
And also think because they are divorced, there are certain things that they don't like about each other. And that
yes.
annoy each other, and that also is a source
Yeah.
of humor in
Yeah.
one way.
Yes, yes. You sort of wonder what attracted them in the first place. Why did they get married? But I have experience in my own family of the best marriages are when people are very, very different. Like my parents, for example, they were total opposites, but they got on so well. It was the best marriage I have ever known of. So it shouldn't be impossible, but for those two, they were married for about 15, 17 years or something. I'm talking about Adam and Sophia now, not my parents. And, they adapted and they brought out, like the cliche goes, they bring out the best in each other. But then it starts to wear thin, and there's also something which is a bit of a secret, which gradually comes out, which is the underlying reason why they couldn't be married.
Chapter 25. So, dear listeners, you have to read it, definitely, because at chapter 25, I thought, oh, yes, okay, now I get where this person...
It changes perspective.
Yes, exactly.
I mean, overall, the book is a lot about family and relationships.
Yes.
And I wondered, there's one short passage in there, if this is typical
For
in
Iceland,
Iceland.
for Iceland, you mean?
no.
Okay.
Because he was looking for a phone number, and his assistant or secretary finds it. Because it says, but I remembered he lived next door to the mother of my friend's ex-daughter-in-law. It's a quite complicated relationship. Does everybody know each other, or are these relationships so interconnected?
Yes, that's the short answer. If you put two Icelanders next to each other in like an airplane and they're stuck there for maybe 3 hours, they will invariably start trying to figure out connections. And we do this obviously in all kinds of settings, because being a small society, we can always find some kind of connection. We were in the same class with somebody's, the other person's parents or brother or sister. And it's just like a game, really, where people are trying to figure out how they connect. And as Adam is coming from abroad, he is totally lost in this context, and he doesn't know everybody. And so he is often like, just he doesn't, as if he doesn't speak the language, but he does. But this is also, many foreigners find it strange how we can keep track of each other because we don't have family names. And we just, like my father was called Leo, that was his Christian name. That's why I'm Leósdóttir. And there's nobody else in my family with that name because my brother is Leo's son. So we have this funny custom of no family name. So for foreigners, it seems, like a miracle that we can even connect and find out who's related to who. But
True.
for us, obviously, it's just normal.
And you also mentioned in the book when you compare our characters, because that what riles him a little bit is because his ex-wife sometimes accuses him of being too English, and sometimes she even accuses him of being too Icelandic. Yeah. So which is it?
Well, he can't win with Sophia. He cannot win.
Yeah.
She criticizes, his Icelandic is almost perfect, but every now and again, from German that we have a lot of different ways. It's not enough to know a table is a table. It's whether you're going to the table, coming from the table, something is on the table or under, then the word table changes. And so obviously a foreigner like Adam, he gets confused, and she is like a hawk. She gets on his case immediately. So, but if he uses an Icelandic, something which he thinks is only for typical Icelanders, then, like you said, he's criticized for that as well. So he can't win.
Yeah, no matter what. And the book itself, I mean, the story itself, I mean, you said it, Teacup, you said it's not hard-boiled crime fiction, but it's also not cozy crime. It's somewhere in the middle.
Yes, I always get into this problem with my books. The reason I started writing crime novels is because it was so complicated to explain to people what kind of book, was on the table. And I was trying to tell people how they, what to expect in my novels. Like you were saying, or like we were saying before, there's a lot of humor in most of, even when I wrote a book for young adults about suicide and the danger of attempted suicide and depression. And even that has humor in it. So it's just, I just find it impossible not to write that kind of text. Now I've forgotten your question.
No, I said that the story itself, or the crime story itself, is not that hard-boiled crime fiction. It's also not cozy. It's in between, and like you said, you found your genre more or less with crime fiction. And do you think? I mean, we've pondered about this before. Is crime fiction the best genre where you can be everything as an author? You can be humorous, you can be bloody if you like, anything in between.
Yeah, I suppose. But what I really wanted to do was to carry on writing exactly the kind of books I was writing before, but to make it easier to package and to explain to people. So I just threw in a crime or two, and not too bloody because that's not my style. And then I can proudly say this is a crime novel, and everybody knows what they're in for. But of course, yes, it isn't very hardcore. It's mild, but still not. I wouldn't call it cozy crime.
No,
but
no.
say that I've been writing about the same thing in all genres in all my 20 books, because the thing I'm interested in, whether it's fiction or nonfiction, it's always relationships, like you were saying before. Families, co-workers, or friends, whatever. What makes people tick and how they connect, what they're thinking, what they're feeling. That's what's interesting to me. And I sometimes have to have like little stickers on my computer screen to remind me to describe surroundings, because I do not have like half a page of describing the sky and the clouds or the weather and the storm. I'm so interested in the people and how they feel and what they're thinking. So I completely forget to describe what they look like, what they're wearing, and stuff like that. So I have to remind myself remember the surroundings and give people an idea where this is happening.
And is it really necessary to constantly describe what the sky looks like or what people look like? Because it leaves this way. The way you write, you just described, leaves more to the imagination for the reader?
I think so too. Also, I think I've sometimes read novels, sometimes crime novels, with lots of descriptions of landscape, etc. And I have the tendency to flip the page and skip some of the text. And I think that it's a bit sad if you put in so much of the surroundings that you just the reader wants more about what's happening, and I don't want my readers to do that.
Does it have to do with you also writing plays where you only write the dialogue?
Yes, I think so, probably yes. I don't write plays anymore, but I did for a long time, and I really enjoyed it. It's maybe what I enjoyed most of what I've been writing. And also, I have dabbled in poetry, although I haven't shown much of it to other people. And then what I love about poetry is that you have to cut out everything that's not necessary until you're right down to the bones of things. And maybe that's also an influence that I don't want to have too much of a fuzzy surrounding.
Cut to the chase, so to speak. Is this also what interests you in people? Cut to the chase, like you said before. What makes them tick?
Absolutely. Oh, yes. My favorite occupation is sitting in a cafe where nobody knows me, meaning not in Iceland, and just watching people go by. Because in a small community, like we were saying before, where people know each other, then it's a little bit difficult to just stare and maybe eavesdrop a little bit on the next table. It's a little rude, of course, but if you're abroad, you can do it with no shame and listen and speculate. And my wife has often asked me, what do you think those people on the next table, do you think, are they having an affair or what do you think? She knows I've always got a theory. And I must admit, I once made a complete fool of myself because I was so curious. We were at a holiday resort in the UK, and it was mostly elderly people or young families with kids because there were water slides and all sorts of things for the kids. And then there were these four guys. Four of them were Indian, and one of them was a white guy. And they were there, they were stuck out like a sore thumb. They were not the clientele you would imagine with this kind of a holiday camp. And when we had sat, in the restaurant with them for 2 or 3 days, I just couldn't contain myself. I stood up and I went to the table and said, "Excuse me, I'm just so curious what you're doing here." And I got an answer. And do you want to know?
Yes.
Sure.
The white English guy was going to marry into the Indian family, and this was like a long stag do, except they were drinking water and tea, and everybody very polite. So I was so relieved. Otherwise, I would still be thinking about those guys, what they were doing.
Not what you had expected.
But I think hardly anyone would have expected this answer.
Not in the least. Not in the least. But I get. I know what you describe, because it also sometimes easier when people don't realize that you can understand what they are talking about.
Yes, absolutely. That's where it comes in handy to be from Iceland, and you can speak. Like if I'm with my wife somewhere, people here we are foreigners, and they maybe don't realize that we also understand what they're saying.
Yes, we had that one time or the other in the UK as well, when the people on the next table or next to us didn't realize that we understood them when they spoke German.
In a hotel or restaurant.
In a hotel or restaurant, yeah. It's interesting. And I also wanted to ask you about the characters that make up the whole case in Deceit. You said you are interested in people, relations, family relations. We have a very interesting bunch of people in this case.
Yes.
Quite unusual. And their connection. How did you come up with that?
This is the part where I get a little bit tongue-tied because I don't want to reveal.
Yes, of course.
About, because the case sort of is like a snowball. It gets bigger and it involves more people. But I think maybe it's a modern Icelandic family, because we have a lot of people where there is a half sibling or a step sibling and there's a stepmother or whatever. We have a lot of families like that. So that it's interesting to figure out how they connect and whether they get on well together or not, and how it all fits together, and whether everybody's equal or there are some inequalities there or what.
Yeah.
A minor character, which I find always quite interesting, is Adam's secretary Gunninga, who seems to know everything that you should know, whereas he's a bit out of touch with some things, and she seems like a lexica in some way.
Yeah.
Yes, she is maybe the typical Icelandic woman of that age. She doesn't maybe know all the young people, but she knows everybody maybe above a certain age, maybe above 40 plus or something. So she is, she knows her friends and her colleagues, and she just it's you find so many women like this, and I belong to two sewing circles, like we call them. We don't do any sewing. It's just meeting and chatting and maybe having a red wine or something.
Like book clubs.
Yeah.
I hear.
Yeah, exactly. And some of my friends in those sewing circles, they know everybody. So the minute you mention a name, you hear a long story about who was in school with who and who lived next to who and who was married and now divorced and blah blah blah. I find it fascinating because I'm not really good at this, but there's a lot of, especially women, but I guess men too, who are very up to date on all the goings on.
Your father, for example.
But then, there's 360,000 of us. So obviously nobody has everything under control. But certain areas, of society you can be up to date with.
And she's also not 100% politically correct, is she?
She's absolutely not.
She's human.
Yes, the psychologists who are obviously trying to be politically correct and have everything, just so. They have been trying to teach her. She's been working for them for years, but she never learns. She calls, the clients. She almost calls them psychos, but not quite. But she's very difficult to handle, and she's just around 70, and many of the psychologists, they want to make her retire, but she doesn't mention it. And no, she is such a fierce woman that they haven't quite worked up the courage to tell her to retire.
I think she's an employee, but she runs the place.
Absolutely does, yes. There is a character like her in most of my books. It's not, I'm not saying I'm repeating myself, but I love that type of woman, sort of slightly, not quite, she's middle-aged plus or whatever, and has a lot of strong opinions and likes to be dominating in a social setting.
And no nonsense woman.
Yeah, but they're often
absolutely no nonsense. Yeah,
they're often the most fun.
Yep, absolutely.
They're not worried about what people think of them.
Yep,
they're always right, of course. They think they're always right. So yeah, I think even in my novels for young adults, there is always a grandmother or someone in the book who is that kind of character. And in my the books for young adults, I also use those old battle axes to sort of teach the kids maybe better Icelandic, because they obviously have to speak, the teenage language. And then there's always the grandmother telling them how they should really speak. And that's me getting, the information across.
That raises a question with me in Iceland. How big is the influence of other languages? Because in the UK, I think there's a big influence of the American English because of films and TV. As in Austria, there's the German because of TV and the books are printed there. So how is that in Iceland?
We have a lot of worries about this because young kids, they grow up with YouTube and with TV, and they hear English all the time. When I was growing up, my first language at school, first foreign language, was Danish and then English. But now we have 9 grandchildren down to the age of 4, and you could speak to all of them in English. And my 8-year-old granddaughter, she has her own series on YouTube, Nina's World. And everything is in English, and she corrects my pronunciation because she's learned her from Australian and USA programs on YouTube, and she speaks like an American or like an Australian. And it's just scary because Icelandic is only spoken by us here on this island. And it's so important. This is a passion of mine to protect our language. And I'm really worried whether, what's going to happen in maybe 50 years' time or so. Now I'm getting very serious.
We do understand that because here in
It's important to protect it.
Absolutely, because here in Austria we always say when we hear the school children speak on the bus or somewhere, they all sound like Germans.
And not like Austrian children.
They do not sound like we did.
At least in Vienna.
In Vienna, I can't say for the countryside, but in Vienna they all sound like Germans.
But they're not Germans. They're
but
Austrians.
They're not Germans,
and I think language has to do with your identity.
Yeah.
And you should sound like the country you come from, more or less, I think.
I agree, yes. And also for us, it's just a matter of survival, literally, of our culture, of our heritage, because we have the old sagas written 2,000 years ago, almost 1,000 years ago, and people are, we can still read them with our knowledge of modern Icelandic. You can almost read what was being written all those hundreds of years ago, and I worry that this is not going to be the case slightly further in future. That's a connection to our heritage and our history that's going to be lost.
And how have those sagas influenced you, if at all, as a writer?
They have not.
They have not.
Because, I live very much in the here and now, and I love books and everything about people living today, modern people. So I'm not a great fan of the sagas, I'm sorry to say. So, of course, I've read them. In school, you have to do that. And I appreciate the heritage that's, in there. And I know that our sort of tradition as storytellers, it comes from those old days. And also because they were so, we didn't have books. They wrote the sagas on calf skin. And so there was a lot of storytelling in the homes while people were working and the knitting and sewing in the evening. And then somebody was telling a story. So it's all knotted into our psyche, but it's not something I read, and I don't think I've been particularly influenced by those sagas. Maybe to my shame, probably.
But I also wanted to know where the idea for the crime came from. What I mean is how this whole investigation started off. I mean, I hope is it allowed to say it starts with needles in fruits?
Yes, absolutely.
Where did you get that idea from? Did you read a lot about it, or did something like that happen in Iceland?
Yes, not in Iceland. Okay. No, I read a lot of the news on the media in the UK and also from other countries, and it's happened, especially in Australia. Adam starts to look this up on his computer and in his psychological magazines when the cases start to appear in Iceland. So I remember there was a case where needles were found in strawberries in Australia, all over that huge continent. So it couldn't have been the same perpetrator. And so I just found this so fascinating. Why would somebody do it? It's terrorism, of course. You are hurting some people who you don't know, and it could happen. It could hurt anyone, little children or whatever. So it always fascinated me why somebody would do that. What's behind it? And so I can't tell you, or I can't tell the listeners the reason in the book. But I found it, if you can say fascinating about a crime, I found it like a fascinating crime.
Because I think something similar happened in Germany once, where a perpetrator wanted to blackmail a company.
Yeah, and the poisoned I think water bottle,
something like that.
Yeah, and people have also found, do you remember the cases of little pieces of glass in baby food?
Yeah.
Stuff like that. So it's happened in many different ways in many different countries. But I never in Iceland, as far as I know.
Okay. But I think
that's also a challenge. You want to do something, you don't want to replicate something that's happened.
Yeah. But if you hear or read too much about these things, one can understand Adam, who says, I don't want to have anything that anyone else prepared.
Yes.
Yes.
You have to find a balance.
Yeah.
And with Adam, it's also because of the germs, or
Yeah.
because of infection. And he always has plastic, these rubber gloves in his pockets, and of course sanitizer. And he's afraid of, but when things like needles in food come to the attention of the media and the general public, people naturally are afraid. So it's a scary situation.
We have talked a lot about Adam, but what about his ex-wife? I think you said at the book launch she's a little bit of a bulldozer.
Yes.
So where did she come from? I mean, you said Adam has been on your mind as a character because of his Englishness and so on, and you wanted to put someone like him into a book. But what about her? Where did she come from?
She is really a typical Icelandic woman. We sort of we just do what you have to do, and she is like that. She just gets on with it.
Yeah.
So, like you were saying, she's just she's a no nonsense woman, and her former in-laws called her the bulldozer when she didn't hear.
Yeah.
They got this nickname for her. But I think it's a common trait in Icelandic women. We just get on with it. We most of us have a job, and we also raise a family, and maybe 2 or 3 jobs, and then we sing in a choir or something else. And it's just we are doers.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to have some energy, and you have to be independent. And I think she is like a typical Icelandic woman, really. And for sensitive middle class British people like Adam's family, she can, they find her a little bit off-putting.
Maybe a bit overwhelming.
Maybe.
Yes. And I found when I lived in the UK, it took me a while to get used to all these thank yous and excuse me's and sorries and everything that dropping off people's lips all the time, because we don't have that here. We just get on with it. But different nations have different cultures. So she is like maybe a stereotype Icelandic woman.
Really? Do you think so? Is she?
Well, I was reading yesterday for a group of people, both men and women, and there was a Sophia in the audience, and she raised her hand and said, "I think I'm just like her."
Okay.
You pull up your sleeves and you get going and you do what has to be done. So but obviously in a book, both the Englishness of Adam and the Icelandicness of Sophia, it's slightly exaggerated. Like not the caricature, but to get the contrast, I get sort of not. I try to build it up a little bit.
Yeah. And you said the Icelandic women they're rolling up the sleeves and get things done. I suppose they have been that way all the time, back then and now.
Yes.
And when did they get the recognition for that?
I'm not sure they've got the recognition still. It's a long battle. But I think the climate here and the way the Iceland was so sparsely populated in the old days. There was a long space between one farm and the next farm. And also it was the summer is really short. So the men, they were mostly farmers, of course. They had to go and become seamen or mariners in the winter. They were farmers in the summer. And then what did the woman do? She was left with the farm, with the cows and the sheep and the children.
They had no choice. I mean, the men were at sea, the women had to take care of the farm, of the children. It was always like that. But
Always like,
but it did change at one point. But you said not enough yet?
No, I think maybe it's just because it's been evolving for centuries. Women having to stand on their own feet and having to take part in everything, milking the cows. And I'm talking obviously about the old days when most of Icelanders were farmers. And it was a hard life because we have a long and dark winter. So women they were not sitting there, doing some embroidery or anything. They had to pull up the sleeves and do everything to keep things going. And then I think it just shaped our DNA. And I think it's in our DNA to do things and be active and also, have a role in society. And obviously we gradually got the right to vote just over 100 years ago, and then taking more part in society, being recognized, the women's part of making everything work. But it's not 100% the same salary for men and women. We're still trying to fight to get exactly the same salary. Obviously, it is in some occupations, but not over the whole of society. Men tend to have higher wages. And so there's still a lot to be done. But Icelandic women, I think, are very independent and financially and otherwise. And I think it comes from the old days, from our DNA.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but maybe it also has to do with the way you name people. Because women, even if they're married, they don't change their names. It's your name and it stays your name. Whereas somewhere else, it's traditionally, not nowadays, but traditionally, it's like you're owned by the man you're marrying. I mean, you don't have to change your name, but that's historically, and it's a different way to think about it, I guess.
I think it sort of shows how we think and how independent the women are. Obviously, you are connected to your father, so you got your father's name, but especially now in modern times where people sometimes cohabit and they get married and they get divorced, it would be so complicated to be continually changing your name, and it would be so inconvenient. And I think it's also things like your name, they influence how you think of yourself. And so I think a lot of material things affect your self-confidence and your independence. And definitely the name tradition is definitely one of it. One of those things. And when I used to live in England, it was also so strange to me that when women I knew, they were getting engaged, and they just after getting engaged, they went to their boss and said, "I'm going to be retired, stopping work soon. I'm going to resign because I'm getting married." And I just wondered, what the hell are you going to do? Sorry about my language. What are you going to do? Sitting at home and doing like a casserole, ready for your husband to come home? This is something that would be unthinkable. I'm talking about, this is what I got to know in the UK in the 70s, maybe, and probably it's not like this anymore, because obviously people need two incomes to support the family and everything like that. But I found it very alien, because coming from here, you're used to being, a part of society.
Yeah. And do you think, or what do you think about the notion that in times of crisis, it's more the women we look towards to?
Oh, I don't know. Do we?
I don't know. That's what you said recently about politicians and
a few
such.
years back, I read something about before an election, I don't know where, that in difficult times when there's a crisis, women candidates are more likely to get voted into office, because somehow men are seen to manage this crisis more than men. I don't know.
Yes, my wife is a good example, because everything, Iceland was almost bankrupt in 2008. Like, we had this huge bank crisis. 3 banks went bankrupt, and the government had to be changed, and my wife became prime minister. But I don't know whether it's because women are so capable. I know they are, but they're only given a chance when the guys have, made a car crash of everything. So now you can save it, now you can do it. Clean up, and then we come back and take the reins when you've cleaned up. And I think there is a poem which my wife cited very often. It's by one of our best poets. She is now deceased. And it was about the woman who comes into the smoke-filled room where men have been plotting, and having a huge conference. And then there's always this woman who comes and opens up the windows and airs the room and cleans the table. And it's a bit like that in politics as well. And then the guys come back and said, now I can do it.
Mhm.
Yeah,
And
true.
if she fails, men are back
Yeah.
to save the day.
Yeah.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Women are used to managing because they very often manage the household, the family. So
Yeah, true.
Yeah, I think my wife often quoted the difference when men and women are starting a company, a small, just starting off. And women very often start off on the kitchen table with very little overhead and just doing everything, working all the hours God gives. And the men, they start by renting a big office, buying fancy furniture. They go about it in a different way.
Yeah, true.
Yeah, so I think it's the mentality. Maybe we like to play it more safe or something, and which I think is a good thing.
Yep, absolutely. I also wanted to ask you one more question about the cover of the book of Deceit, because the picture reminded both of us a little bit of the Evil Queen.
Yes, it's similar to there was also an apple on the cover and some blood and some needles in the apple in the Icelandic version. So yes, maybe it gives the wrong idea. I don't know, but it's supposed to connect something which is so common and so innocent, like an apple, and to connect it with blood is something that makes you, I hope, curious.
It does.
yeah,
It
especially
does.
because it's so red, it draws your eye to it.
Ah, yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's unusual, which is good. It's something you would pick up in a bookshop.
I think it's so minimalist that I think it stands out. Yes, I do. But it's so difficult. Have you know English bookshops? They are like a huge big box of chocolates, and there are so many things. You want them all. So to be able to stick out there, I don't know what you have to do.
Yeah, if the books were chocolate, I would look like this.
Definitely, me too.
Also, the chocolate shops are very
Yeah,
tempting.
exactly. Jónína, may I ask you, as a very successful writer, what would be your advice for any other aspiring author?
I think maybe to listen to your need to write, because I think if writing is just such it's you need to do it to feel happy, then you're on the right way, and then you should keep on and never give up. It's a marathon. It's not a sprint. You have to have a lot of patience, and because obviously to get published, it's a big threshold. So you have to get over that, and then you have to carry on. So I think you really have to be the type of person who cannot not write if you're going to get along, because it must be such a passion or such a craving or such a need that you just can't not write, and then you're in the right profession.
You ask an interesting question of Solveig, if being published in other languages influenced her writing. Does it influence you in a way or not at all?
Not at all, really, because it's only recent. I only recently had a book out in English, which is more or less like getting out into the wider world, because like we were talking about before, so many people speak and understand English. So it's a great opportunity. But I have had books translated into Danish, Hungarian, and German. And I don't know, I just tend to think about the Icelandic audience, or not really even about the Icelandic audience, because I think about what I'm interested in and what I want to explore in each book, because there's always something I want to. My books always have a social side to them. I write about things in society. I wouldn't call them problems necessarily, but issues that I would like people to think about. And so they are purely Icelandic, but they are also universal. So I'm not really thinking about anyone except myself. And that's also why I love and put a lot of work into establishing the protagonists, because they are my workmates and I have to wake up every morning and work with them, and they have to be fun people in some ways. My favorite maybe was Etta in the Etta series, because she was such a humorous lady, and she still is. Maybe I'll do a book about her in the future also. But yeah, so you mostly think about writing an exciting story that you would enjoy reading, and then the rest just has to take care of itself.
Which means, in essence, you have to be patient about what you do. Otherwise, how shall the reader be patient about your books then?
Yes, well, you have to also put yourself in the shoes of the reader. You have to give them enough information to keep them interested, and not, get off, being on a social platform. You have to have interesting goings on and keep the interest and the flow and a little bit of fun, maybe. Yeah. So it's a balance, and you have to keep. It's like making a recipe, making a cake. You have to have the right ingredients.
Yeah, it's a good metaphor. What are your plans for the future? What can you share with our audience?
Well, the second book about Adam and Sofia has just been published last month in Iceland. So that's out now, and I'm doing a lot of PR for that. And then in January, I will start writing book number 3, which I am already started thinking about. Book number 3 about Adam and Sofia. And I don't think any further, because I think that's maybe asking too much. You never know how much time you have. Especially, I'm now 68, so it's not, I might not have a million years to go. So I just take 1 year at a time. I hope I can finish the book I have in my head now, and then I don't know what happens next. Whatever takes my fancy.
And will Corylus publish them as well?
I don't know.
Okay.
Let's put pressure on them. I hope so.
Okay. I thought they would just.
I have no idea. Okay. Maybe they have spoken to my publisher here, but I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah, I hope so.
Yeah,
one's not enough.
No, never. I mean, come on, we just got into Adam and Sophia. Just we want to learn more about them.
I mean, they can always go back and translate the others.
Yeah, yes, Corylus. The other ones, the Icelandic Miss Marpleby, please, pretty, please. We want to read them, maybe? Doesn't have to be German. We rarely read German these days, so doesn't matter. So, Jónína, is there anything else you would like our listeners to know? Past, future, present?
I'm just so grateful to anybody who picks up one of my books out in the wider world. I think it's amazing, because most of my books have been just published in Icelandic. So I'm just really happy if people want to give my books a chance. And I just think it's wonderful. It's like winning the lottery. Each reader is, my favorite.
I think Icelandic authors are gathering a bigger audience in the United States these days.
Yes, apparently, yes.
Yeah, because Nordic noir is very popular at the moment.
I think also I read somewhere that slightly not so bloody, maybe not cozy crime, but towards cozy crime is getting more popular. So that's really where I am at. So I'm crossing my fingers.
Do you have any idea why that is? Because this re-established interest in cozy crime, why is it back now?
I read somewhere that it's to do with the war in Ukraine and the situation and the energy and the higher cost of living, and in the UK maybe Brexit. People are having a hard time, and maybe it's a kind of an escape. It's not my theory. I read it somewhere, so it sounds plausible.
Yeah, but often in hard times, humor is on the upward trend. So maybe because times are bleak, people like to be
Escapism.
Yeah.
To
Humorous
escape.
entertainment to be made to laugh
Probably.
once in a while.
That sounds right. Yeah.
Don't we all? Any more, Jacob? Questions? No more questions for our guest? No? From me neither. Jónína, it was a pleasure having you on and talking to you. Thank you so much for making time for us.
Thank you for this opportunity. I loved speaking to you.
It was wonderful speaking to you and hearing from you. Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
You did enjoy this episode as much as we did? Then hit subscribe and don't miss the next episode. Also, make sure to follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. If you like to support us and buy us a coffee, you can do so via Buy Me a Coffee and other platforms. You can find all the necessary links in the description. Until next time.